Good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ashley Brizendine. I'm the marketing manager here at Determine, a Corcentric company, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Our agenda for the next hour will start with a brief introduction on Determine, a Corcentric company. I will then introduce our speakers for today, who will be reviewing the Ardent Partners 2019 ePayables Technology Advisor Report. We'll then take a look at Determine's technology offering and rankings, and then at the end we will have some time for Q&A. Determine, a Corcentric company, is a leading global provider of SaaS, source-to-pay, and enterprise contract lifecycle management solutions. The Determine Cloud platform provides procurement, legal, and finance professionals analytics of their supplier contract and financial performance. Today's presenters are Bob Cohen, Research Director and Vice President of Marketing for Ardent Partners, as well as Sudarshan Ranganath, Vice President of Product Management at Corcentric. Bob advances evolutionary strategies within spend and supply management and evangelizes the enhancement of accounts payable, electronic commerce networks, business travel and expense management, and other key areas. He is also responsible for the firm's marketing function. Sudarshan is an accomplished product management executive with 15 plus years of driving strategy and tactical execution to create market-leading enterprise cloud products and services, drive customer adoption, revenue, profitability, and long-term enterprise value. With that, I welcome you all to today's webinar, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Bob.
Great, thank you. Good day, everybody, and welcome. I'm pleased to be here. Very excited about going through the Ardent Partners 2019 ePayables Technology Advisor and our analysis of Determine. As Ashley said, I'm joined today by Suds, as he's well known in the industry, and he'll be joining us in shortly here. So the one thing that Ashley had mentioned, which a slight change, was we'll go into an overview of Determine after I do the presentation and introduce you to the ePayables Technology Advisor. So with that, I wanted to talk a little about Ardent Partners for those of you that may not be familiar with us, kind of give you an understanding of the firm and really our qualifications for producing a report of this type. Ardent's a research and advisory firm that focuses on defining and advancing strategies, processes, and technologies that drive business value and accelerate organizational transformation within the procurement, accounts payable, and finance departments of an enterprise. Ardent closely covers the source-to-settle solution provider marketplace and produces research to help businesses, decision makers understand the technology landscape and identify the best fit solutions based upon their specific requirements and budgets. Since 2010, Ardent has been the preeminent source of accounts payable automation expertise and thought leadership for AP, procure-to-pay, and finance professionals alike. Today, Ardent Partners directly influences thousands of global organizations each month with its vast and wide-ranging research and consulting efforts. Ardent's analysts have decades of firsthand experience evaluating, packaging, deploying, and using ePayable solutions, making us eminently qualified to publish research that informs and guides readers on A, how to plan and execute AP transformation, and B, which solution providers can deliver the greatest value. No other analyst firm approaches the depth and experience in ePayables possessed by Ardent, and the Ardent advantages include are numerous. We have a team of senior analysts with decades of direct experience working in the AP, ePayables, and source-to-pay space. We have a library of market research we've produced over the past 10 years. We've surveyed tens of thousands of organizations over our time, and so we have great data and depth from which to draw upon. So when we speak, it's not just our opinion. This is based upon empirical data that's there. We work frequently with practitioners like yourself on the phone as an advisor for RFPs, for projects or implementations as well. And we have an engaged community of AP, P2P, finance, sourcing, procurement professionals that we engage on a regular basis. And the Ardent Partners sites are amongst the highest trafficked in the space. For those of you not familiar with our payablesplace.com site, it's dedicated exclusively to AP professionals, and I encourage you to visit. It's a wealth of information on interviews with leaders such as the CEO of Corcentric, one of the companies we're talking about today. We do a FinTech series, and we were fortunate enough to be able to interview the CEO of Corcentric. We also have subject matter expertise articles on what's coming out, what you should be considering. We do updates on technology, keep you up to date on the latest news. So it's just a great place to find information about the space that you're in. So Ashley kind of touched on this briefly, our agenda here. We're going to start off for why we bothered to do this research in the first place, the need for it, how we went about selecting vendors to be included in the report, the methodology that we used, the framework that Ardent created 10 years ago. That's still the industry standard for looking holistically at ePayable solution providers. Then we'll get into determine solution profile. We look at their strengths and weaknesses, some considerations. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to turn it over to Suds, who's going to introduce you at a greater depth to determine. And then finally, we'll get to the Q&A section. So the ePayables Technology Advisor, as you can see on your screen, is designed to help AP and finance leaders navigate the ePayables provider landscape. Having worked in the industry for close to 20 years, attending many conferences, talking to hundreds, if not thousands, of different practitioners and companies out there, one thing that resonates is a lot of confusion. I was recently at a conference and people were walking around the trade show floor, and someone came up to me and said, everybody looks like they do the same thing. How do we know what's the right solution for us? And that is exactly why we wrote this report. We took a look at who the leaders are in the space, those that can provide a great solution for those looking to automate accounts payable and their ePayables processes. So that was really the genesis of the report and why we did it. We think that it was a hole in the market, that there was nothing specifically targeting the ePayables solution provider space. So we wanted to provide that service to the community out there. Our report analyzes and assesses some of the major solution providers in the marketplace today. As I mentioned, it's designed to serve as a resource to anybody who's undergoing an ePayables transformation, looking to automate their accounts payable department. They already have a solution, is wondering, what the latest and greatest is, and, is my solution right for me? Is there something else I should be looking at? And, after reading this report, we really want the readers to be able to segment and identify and ultimately select the ePayable solution provider that best aligns with their needs, their specific requirements from both a functional and budgetary perspective. All of the providers included in this report have a long-standing track record and proven ability to deliver AP automation solutions to both small, medium, and global enterprises. There's many new entries into the marketplace, and some of them have, very good offerings. But what we looked at in this report is really some of the more established players out there that provide a more holistic solution coverage of ePayable needs and wants and markets. So the research process that we used was pretty extensive, if you will. We used a multimodal approach. This means just, lots of different views and angles and inputs into the process that was there. We leveraged both quantitative and qualitative analysis into our procedure here. So we leveraged in the report 7 different sources of data to produce the rankings and evaluations. RFI, we produced an RFI, not unlike what any of you on the phone listening in would produce when you're evaluating a solution provider. So for those companies that participated, they understand what is involved in filling out and completing a thorough RFI. The request for information addressed things such as companies' size, the customers, its partners, its financial strength. We also captured details about the breadth of the offering, the current capabilities, the roadmap, the strategy, and adoption by the customers itself. Each of the providers needed to give us a 90-minute briefing, which was interactive. They presented an overview on their company, their solution, their roadmap. It also included a solution demonstration. It was very interactive. When we saw something that piqued our curiosity or felt that something might have been missing, we asked questions and allowed the solution provider to respond to us. So it was a very in-depth and thorough briefing and demonstration that was conducted for each of these. As I mentioned, the demonstration of the complete functionality of the solution provider's offering was included there, from the receipt, the processing, and the payment portion of the ePayables process was included in the demonstration. Also, it's anybody who's ever listened to a salesperson or someone selling something, many times that sounds great. We wanted to validate what was being told to us and what we saw. So reference calls were part of the process that we're here. So each of the solution providers included in the report were required to give us a number of their customers that we could speak with, and we interviewed them on how they used the solution, what they liked about it, the implementation process, any successes they had, any things they'd like to see added to it. So a very thorough interview with the clients that were provided there. And I'm often asked if the solution providers were allowed on the reference calls, and the answer is no. This was just a one-on-one conversation between myself and the many different organizations that were provided to us. And for this report itself, I personally interviewed over 50 different companies, AP managers, directors, shared services, and queried them on their use and implementation of the specific solutions that were there. We leveraged our experience, obviously, as I mentioned before. We have decades of experience in AP automation, source to pay, and we leverage that. We know, what to look for, what questions to ask, what's important. So we leverage that during our research, as you might imagine there. I also mentioned that we have over the past decade, we've conducted extensive series of market research studies and studied the space. We leveraged that for our report as well. And then additionally, we as a firm receive hundreds of inquiries on an annual basis from practitioners like yourself with questions about AP automation, source to pay. And so we leverage that to determine and include what was important in the report itself. So the ranking criteria and definitions that we used here in the report, we ranked the solution providers based on two essential areas of consideration. The first was solution strength, which included the quality, the depth, the breadth of the current ePayable solution provider across the AP process as defined by Ardent ePayables framework, which I'll show in a few minutes here. We looked at considerations such as how easy the solution was to use. Did it have a good user interface? Was it intuitive? Was it built for the end user? Was it built for the power user in AP? The functionality, how wide the functionality was. Could it do everything that would be required in a typical AP department's job? We looked at its ability to support key tasks, how well it was able to support suppliers, business units, other functions within the business itself, all the processes that drive the AP function. We didn't just look at one specific area, let's say workflow, for instance. We looked at a wide range of areas, which I'll cover there. And then secondly, on the other axis where we rated the solution providers, we looked at provider strength. So we wanted to understand what this provider brought to market here. So how good they were in their support capabilities, how good they were in delivering the solution, the implementation process. We looked at their ability to provide analytics and reporting, if they had any specific areas of specialization. Some solutions go after a specific vertical or a specific ERP. We just wanted to know, was it a broad-based solution or was it one that was specific to a specific area that's there? We looked at their product roadmap. It's great that you have a solution today, but we all know that technology is a moving target, if you will. So we wanted to know what their roadmap was, what was on the future. There's many changes. We hear about RPA, artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, Bitcoin. We wanted to understand what their plans were and their thought were going forward, because we want to make sure that any solution that we recommend not only was able to solve today's challenges that an AP department is facing, but also one that would support them going forward into the future there. And then the provider strength, also customer references. Everything I've just mentioned previously under the provider strength category, we went through with each of the customers we spoke to, saying, how was the implementation process? Was it seamless? Did you encounter any challenges in that process? How was your ongoing support? Did they get back to you quickly? Or is there a delay there? Are the people on the phone knowledgeable about the processes that they're talking about? So it was a very thorough analysis there. So I mentioned here the Ardent Partners ePayables framework. Since our firm was created 10 years ago in 2010, we've been using this framework, which helps organizations kind of streamline and automate the processes from start to finish. We look at AP automation holistically. There's some providers out there and solutions that cover one or multiple of these areas. For our report here, we looked at the ability to cover the space holistically. And we define the space holistically from the receipt, so the sending, how that supplier sends that invoice in, whether it's done in a paper format, whether it's done electronically, the capabilities to offer different ways to submit and receive and ingest those invoices. And then once that invoice is received, the processing of that invoice, the approval, the routing of that, and then once that invoice has been approved, how it's paid. And I'll kind of take a look at each of these in a little bit more detail so you understand kind of the level of the depth and the granularity of the process that we did here. So on the receive side, we took a look at each solution provider's ability to offer a solution portal. Solution portals are offered by many, but not all of the providers in the space that are out there. We think it's extremely important to help eliminate many of the time-consuming tactical tasks that AP departments do to enable suppliers to self-service themselves. So that's why a supplier portal is extremely important. So we wanted to understand, did each of the suppliers have the provide the offering to enable suppliers to submit invoices, go to a portal to check out the information, the status, had my invoice been received, has it been paid, where it was in the process, and then also supplier portals also offer capabilities opens up capabilities for things such as early payment discounts, etc. So really supplier portals, we're all very familiar with them in our personal lives on the consumer side of the fence. And we think, when it comes to accounts payable, a supplier portal is important for really enabling AP personnel to focus on more value-adding tasks and also provide a better experience for suppliers so they don't need to pick up a phone or send an email and wait for a response. They can go to a supplier portal and check out the status of an invoice or submit an invoice. We looked at, many of the, on the delivery side, we looked at whether or not the providers had a business network. Many providers, including the one we're talking about today, have a business network, which have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of suppliers in their network. Why is this important? If you provide your vendor master file to a list of suppliers to the solution provider, they can do a vendor match. And the more suppliers that they're already dealing with, they're already onboarded on their network. So nothing needs to be done. So those suppliers can submit an invoice to your buyer, and they're ready in the system. So all the challenges of onboarding that supplier are already accomplished. So we looked at the availability of the network, the capabilities, the size, the reach of each of the providers there, and what they offered in these areas there. I mentioned supplier enablement. We all know how difficult it is to onboard suppliers. We looked at the capability of each solution provider, how well they help their customers onboard suppliers, what capabilities they had. Was it merely an email that was sent out? Was it a phone call? Were there other mechanisms they offered to increase the effectiveness of the supplier enablement there? We looked at the file formats. Could the supplier submit invoices in multiple formats? Were they locked into one? There's 50, 60, 70, 80 different file formats out there, if you can believe that. And what we found is many different organizations are familiar with one format or another. So we wanted the flexibility for suppliers to be able to submit invoices in the format that was familiar to them. And so we looked at that. We kind of went in depth on the ability to submit invoices. Was there the capability to submit invoices in paper format, and how well suited was the supplier to handle the ingestion of paper into the process there? So we'll look at that a little bit later as well. So on the processing side, we analyzed the ability of the solution to handle many different workflows. Could they handle straight through processing? How did they handle exception management? What type of invoice matching capabilities did they have? Was the invoice matching automated, or was it manual? Did they have the capability to do a two-way match, which would have been a PO to an invoice, a three-way match, which was an invoice to the goods received to the PO? Did they have an N-way match capability? So it might have been a invoice to purchase order to goods received to a quality inspection, or whatever it may be. We just looked at how flexible the matching capabilities were. Then we looked at the business rules engine. Many times there's not a PO that's associated with an invoice. Depending on the industry that you're in, it could be 90% POs, or it could be 10% POs. It's really dependent, as I said, on the company and the industry that they're in. Some are more apt to have more POs, but for those that don't, how strong was the business rules engine to help automate the approval process for that invoice? So we analyzed that too. We did the capability to put tolerances in there. So if an invoice came in, which didn't have a PO, but you know that every month you're receiving a bill from your caterer, and you know that you have allocated or budgeted $10,000 every month to that. So was that invoice within plus or minus 5% or whatever tolerance you want to set up? If it does, then that invoice could be automatically approved because it matched the business rules and the criteria set up, and sent straight through for processing. And that's really what we want to get to. The ultimate goal for AP automation is to do as much straight through touchless processing as possible, eliminate the manual tasks. And so we evaluated each of the solution providers on their capability there as well. We all know exceptions are a huge issue in accounts payable. In a recent study that we did, we found that it was the largest challenge that AP organizations faced was handling exceptions. So we looked at how well each of the providers was able to automatically manage exceptions. If an exception came in, rather than having somebody have to physically take that exception and call a supplier or call the business unit or track down information, could we automate that process? Because once again, the ultimate goal is automation here. We want to take out the manual, time-consuming, error-prone tasks. So we looked at the ability to manage and clear exceptions automatically there. We looked at the ability to manage PO and non-PO invoices, how well the solution could be configured for the specific business that was using it. We looked at the audit trail capabilities. Having worked in the industry for many years, I know that one thing that is always kind of a stress-inducing time is when the auditors come in each year. And we looked at the ability for the AP automation solution to mitigate some of this tension and the length of time that auditors needed to spend. So were auditors able to be provided with access to all of the invoices that were received and processed and what would happen to them, and could they be given that, in a terminal rather than having to go search the file cabinets for a specific invoice that they were looking for. Then on the payment side, much is being talked about today as the last mile of the ePayables process here. It's an area where we're seeing more and more focus and concentration and money these days from the investment community is being poured into this specific area there. So we looked at the ability of the solution providers, once the invoice had been received, processed, and ready for payment, what their strengths were in scheduling and executing these payments, the different types of payments supported. Was it only ACH? Could they do a virtual card? Did they have financing solutions that were offered as well for early payment discount options that were there? Also, one of the big challenges of paying suppliers is getting their banking information. So how well were they able to onboard suppliers and support suppliers, provided the information to tell the buying organization how they wanted to get paid? We looked at, once again, the ability, is there a portal to communicate the payment status back to a supplier? What we find initially is that organizations want to know when they're going to get paid if they're not getting paid on a regular basis by a buying organization. But over time, as the payment process becomes second nature to them, they know from this specific buyer, they get paid every Tuesday, the second Tuesday of every month. So we find that while the supplier portals and communications are more important initially, as the process becomes more mature and your suppliers know when they're going to get paid, those supplier portals get used as an exception basis rather than a regular basis. I mentioned the ability of financing options, what early pay discounts are available. Does the provider offer dynamic discounting? Is there any supply chain financing options that are available there? As we automate accounts payable, it's much more critical to start thinking strategically. And with the financing options, that's really moving AP from a tactical organization to a strategic organization where it can have an impact on cash flow and working capital management. So we looked at the provider's ability to offer these as well. So now looking specifically into the execution capabilities within the provider strength of each of the providers that were analyzed here. We looked at, our ranking included references, as I mentioned before. We looked at the technical capabilities, the reporting and analytics capabilities. Were there role-based dashboards? Was it a graphical interface? Was a end user able to create a report fairly quickly? How difficult or easy was it to create that report? The level of information that was available to the power user within AP or finance, as well as the end user in the business unit. Having been on both sides of the fence here, personally, I know that when a supplier would call me up looking for payment as a business user, if I had the capability to log into my AP solution and run a report that showed all payments tied to a specific invoice for that specific supplier, I could report back to them automatically. So we looked at the ability to provide that functionality as well. We evaluated on the support and delivery method that was offered there. Did they do the implementation and support themselves? Where was the support located? Was it available 24/7, et cetera? And then we looked at omnibus considerations as well, things that you might not normally take into account, the location of the organization, the size of the staff, et cetera. And then on the provider strength, we also looked at vision. We ranked solution providers on how well their solution demoed to us. And you would think that all of them demoed phenomenally well, but some demoed better than others. It's kind of like test driving a car. Some looked better on the test, or some performed better on the test drive, and some weren't as good as others. So we looked at how well the solution demoed, because that was an indication to us of how well it was going to be perceived by the end user company. We looked at the roadmap of the organization, like where they were going in the future, as I mentioned before, the breadth and depth of the solution. Some providers only offered one or two or or all three of the different components of the ePayables framework. So we looked at that. It doesn't mean that a provider that only offered the ability to process invoices, their capabilities were any less qualified in that specific area. But as we said, we want to look at ePayables holistically in this report from start to finish. So we analyzed providers on their ability to do all three. And in our report, we noted areas where one provider might have been weaker or stronger than another. So that brings us to the evaluation that we did on Determine. So this report, a lot of work goes into this, as you might well imagine, all of the work that I talked about previously. So we produced this report earlier in the year. It published in the first half of the year. And subsequent to our publishing of this report, Determine was acquired by Corcentric. So what I'm going to talk about now is our original analysis of the Determine solution, and then I'm going to give you kind of our updated analysis post-acquisition by Corcentric of the Determine solution, what we think has changed, and considerations to consider as well. So when we looked at the Determine solution, we found that it was, a very solid solution that provided good core AP functionality. Determine's focus was originally on procurement. The AP solution offered competitive invoice management functionality. But with that said, the Determine AP solution was best utilized, we felt, in tandem with an e-procurement solution, and as part of a larger P2P deployment. We thought the strength, they were investing quite heavily in R&D in order to enhance the solution. They made numerous investments to expand and enhance the platform to be more open, to enable greater flexibility, also to integrate third-party apps into their solution as well. It's, in procurement, as an AP, there's many different areas that come into play. You can't be an expert at all of them. So they had a very open approach to working with third-party apps that were there, and they had a very expanded and advanced partner ecosystem, which we found definitely beneficial. They were investing in areas like predictive analytics and machine learning, and trying to focus on becoming more innovative across the suite. The strength that I mentioned also was the robust partner ecosystem. They developed a large and healthy ecosystem of partners to build upon its core EP and P2P solutions. And this included scan and capture, B2B payments, and supply chain finance, something that they weren't doing themselves, but were partnering with others on. So we found that, a very good overall solution, definitely one where if you're looking at a full P2P solution, it was a very good choice to consider there. Some of the considerations that we looked at, I'm kind of adding to what I mentioned before. Determine really wasn't designed to be sold as a standalone AP automation solution. They had some customers they had sold like that, but the vast majority of their customers were more P2P offerings. And that's not a pro or a con. It's just, if you're looking for a full suite, the Determine solution was a great offering for you. We thought, if you're looking for a standalone solution, it just is something to consider there because their strength was certainly for the full suite. The interface we took a look at, the strength of the Determine offering was somewhat masked by a user interface that was a little bit older in the cycle, if you will. And we thought it could benefit from an updated UI, a fresh coat of paint, if you will, kind of a better user experience there. For example, they have very robust reporting capabilities, but the interface would definitely benefit from a facelift to compare more favorably to what was going on in the market there. And then the solution was very capable. We found it very flexible, strong rules engines, approval workflows, very strong, very capable behind the scenes, but as we mentioned, it would benefit by an upgraded user interface. We thought a refresh for what was going on currently. So that's our analysis before the acquisition of Determined by Corcentric. So since then, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, how things have changed there. We talked about the limited ability to support a standalone AP initiative. Corcentric is a leader in the AP automation marketplace. We were very bullish on the acquisition of Determined by Corcentric. We thought that it made great sense because Determined had a very good procure to pay and full P2P offering, and Corcentric was very strong on the AP automation side of the fence. So we think the marriage of the two of them is definitely beneficial to customers of both organizations there. We think that the technology that Corcentric possesses in AP is going to be leveraged by Determined, and that's, we've been briefed, and that's what their plans indicate there. So we think that's a very positive development there. So change from our consideration before, some of our concerns, some of those have been allayed because we think that Corcentric's AP functionality is going to be married and integrated within the Determined solution, and we think that's a definite benefit going forward there. Some of the specific areas that are being addressed is the ability of fully managed service for the paper receipt of invoices there, something that Corcentric excels at there. Also, the ability to fully manage payments. Corcentric has a very robust B2B payment capabilities, which includes the ability for buying organizations to offload all of the payment responsibilities to Corcentric, who will then contact and work with the suppliers to get them paid. So we think that is a huge value add for the Determined client base there. I talked quite extensively about the UI and needing a refresh from the Determined side of the fence. Another area where we think this acquisition will pay huge dividends for the Determined install base is that the Corcentric UI is much more graphical and user-friendly, and it's going to be leveraged in the Determined solution suite. So we think that is definitely a positive development that's there. There's broader configurability, for client process, something that Corcentric had that Determined didn't. We think that'll be a huge benefit to the Determined install base and customers going forward there. And then some of the personalized, the persona-based interfaces and guidance and simpler flow that Corcentric has been developing are also going to be leveraged in the Determined solution there. So we think that's very important as well there. And so the original Determined solution fit, we like to talk about this for any solution product that we covered in the report. We thought that, Determined, as I mentioned, deserved special consideration when an organization was looking to automate the full source to settle process. When the requirements included robust sourcing and contract management, supplier management, and e-procurement solutions. Determined had a much larger base of customers in Europe and was much more skilled and knowledgeable and experienced in that region. So we said anybody who was based in the European Union or had a large number of suppliers there, it was a good solution option for them. And then organizations that wanted a lot of flexibility with their workflows. We talked about, the extensive configurability of the Determined solution that was offered there. So that was our original analysis, and when we said it would be a good fit for a buying organization to consider Determined. So we wanted to update this once again. So now with the additional functionality that Corcentric brings on the AP side, we think the solution is even more robust than it was before, and certainly can be considered for AP only needs as well as full P2P needs. We still think that it offers a great end-to-end solution and should definitely be considered there, but it should not be not considered for an AP-only solution as well, based upon the integration with the Corcentric functionality that's there. As mentioned just a moment ago, Determin's base and was much stronger in Europe. However, Corcentric's base and experience and knowledge is much stronger in North America. We think this is a great combination. So any client that is based in the US or based in the European Union, we think that this should not be a consideration at all anymore. If you're based in one or the other, we think they've got great experience in both areas, and it's definitely something you should feel comfortable with. They know their markets on both sides of the pond extremely well. They know the suppliers, they know how to automate accounts payable, they know the nuances. So we think that's a definite strength when you're looking at a solution provider if you happen to be a multinational organization there. And then finally, we talked about the UI on Determin needing a refresh. It is getting that refresh since the acquisition by Corcentric. So we think that should definitely be much improved kind of going forward. So with that, that's kind of my quick analysis. I can definitely talk about this much more in depth for a greater amount of time, but I wanted to bring Suds on and have him talk a little about the Determin solution, give you a feeling and flavor for the organization and a case study there, and then we'll get to the Q&A section. Suds?
Thank you, Bob. If you want to go to the next slide. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're joining from Europe or anywhere else. My name is Sudarshan Ranganath. As Bob mentioned, I go by Suds, which is a colloquial for beer. I head up the product organization at Determin Corcentric. So I wanted to give you all a quick snapshot of what Determin is and what Corcentric is and what do we have to offer. Bob, thank you. We're so delighted to be part of the report as well as being recognized as a leader. Just for folks, Determin has been in business for a number of years now, even prior to the acquisition of Corcentric, a recognized leader in the source-to-pay space and specifically on P2P as well. You see a number of customers listed on the right for Determin. So we have hundreds of customers in the US as well as over in Europe. Some small, some really large. For example, Biogen and Valeo. Valeo is a large multinational deployment in over 29 countries with more than almost $3 billion in spend going through the platform, 20 different languages and such. So all kinds of deployments on the platform. Specifically, Corcentric bought Determin earlier this year for the strengths in the platform that Determin brought and all the things that we could do. Now, bringing the two organizations together, Corcentric itself has been in business for more than 20 years with 6,000 plus customers today and millions of transactions that we process. So here's just a snapshot of kind of the broader organization. What we do is not specific to any one industry vertical. So we have customers across the spectrum from manufacturing to finance to distribution and food and beverage. So across the spectrum, we have some that are really small organizations, some that are really huge multinationals like 3M or Daimler. So we have customers across the board. So what it really means is the solution is applicable regardless of the vertical or the customer size. So some of the benefits, really what we say that we bring is to be in the middle of B2B transactions and really add value to both sides, to the buyer as well as to the supplier, to drive those transactions to be more efficient and effective, right? So we have been a leader in this space, both from a source to pay perspective as well as from an order to cash on the Corcentric side. So we really want to help customers transform how they procure or pay and get paid in their business cycle. So here's just a kind of functional view of the platform, the Determine cloud platform. It can do everything from upstream things such as being a supplier information management registry to doing sourcing and contract lifecycle management and supplier performance management. So all of those things independent of a transaction lifecycle. To all the things downstream in the context of a transaction lifecycle. So it could, like Bob mentioned, it could start with a purchase rec or a PO process, or it could just start off as a non-PO invoice, and then those invoices coming in, being digitized, being matched two-way or three-way, allocated, and then sent out to as an AP feed to an ERP system. We can also take it all the way through to payments, where we can then execute on the last mile payments on a variety of modes. So check, ACH, virtual card, cross-border, any of that. So what we are also building towards is adding some of the trade financing options that Corcentric has offered for a number of years now, very successfully, probably better than anybody else out there. We're bringing that to the Determine portfolio, really allowing your suppliers to have a lot more options, and then a healthier supplier base is a very huge competitive advantage to buyers. So something that we plan to offer shortly on the Determine platform here. So where we are going is bringing all of the strengths that Corcentric had into the Determine platform and build on top of it. Like Bob said, we're already making a number of these additions already, and introduce that. There's some additional items. So really, the objective is to help customers with their end-to-end spend management. So this includes things such as our group purchasing organization. So Corcentric has offered a GPO for a number of years. We have more than 150 programs, all the way from indirect spend like office supplies and an MRO to other things like fleet services and such. So we have a variety of programs that customers might say, hey, maybe some of these things will just use this GPO program to procure things through that. So in addition to the AP automation pieces that they have, right? We also bought a company a couple of years, almost more like a year and a half ago, called SourceOne. SourceOne is a leading advisory services company in the sourcing and procurement space, and we help customers with whether it be category sourcing or driving procurement events or just being a procurement help desk on an ongoing basis. So tying that advisory services and tying the GPO piece of the business to the rest of the technology that we bring across the entire source to pay spectrum, we think is really a key differentiator for us to help you all be successful. This is just a quick case study. This is of a small customer, Alliant Credit Union, based in Chicago. So they're a top 10 credit union in the country. And they're a small organization, but really had a number of things that they wanted to accomplish, right? So they wanted a centralized solution. They wanted quick onboarding of their entire supplier partners. They wanted to be compliant. Being a financial institution, compliance was big on their list. But they also wanted something that was easy to implement, that was configurable versus needing a lot of customization and writing code. Something that would cover the gamut of their needs, but easily integrate with the rest of their business system. So ACU has been in production for almost 2 years now, very successful, and they're a great customer for us to have. Really kind of exemplifying everything that we have to offer. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either Bob or myself or any of the team here. We would love to chat more about how we could bring value to your business.
Thanks, Suds. Like Sud said, at this point, we'd like to open up the presentation to address any questions that have been submitted during the webinar. It does look like we have a couple sitting in queue, so I'll go ahead and address those publicly. First question, it says, as a company that is still just transitioning from manual processes, which part of the Ardent ePayables framework would you suggest focusing on first?
An excellent question that we get asked frequently there. And there's not one specific answer that we use. We usually end up discussing where a certain organization is, what they're looking to accomplish, where their biggest pains are, before we determine, where to begin. But typically, I would start in the middle. If asked, I'm pressed, I would say, let's work specifically on the process part of the ePayables framework, because if we speed up the delivery of an invoice and the middle part is broken, then all we've done is sped up the bottleneck that's there. And similarly, on the payment side, if it takes too long to process an invoice, the payment portion is going to be late, so that's not as critical. So while all three are important, a case can be made for each of those in their specific areas, I would say let's focus on the middle. So once that invoice does come in, we can work on processing it as quickly as possible, as automated as possible, as straight through as possible. And then once that is in place, I would advocate looking at either the receipt of it or the payment side of it. Suds, what do you say? You've been involved in quite a few cases as well.
No, I think you said it well. I mean, there are lots of different ways customers come into us as well, saying hey, different needs of what is kind of a primary pain, and then first is addressing that primary pain. It could be from how they're receiving invoices, or some people have more of an issue around kind of the tail end of that process. But then before kind of suggesting a solution, what we typically do is just walk through that entirety of the process and identify kind of the different pain points along that kind of transaction life cycle, and then start driving towards addressing those. I think one of the big parts of that is just how much change can an organization take, and based on that, addressing the most pain with the minimal amount of change is kind of what we typically drive with.
I will add one caveat to that, is I have seen organizations that may be having difficulty getting budgeting or funding for their AP automation initiative. Start with the payment piece because of the ability to influence working capital and generate rebates. So some organizations have actually started with the B2B payments as part of a bigger plan because of the rebates that are possible to achieve in the cash flow that they're able to significantly impact in case they're having difficulty getting a project approved. So while they want to do the entire thing, they need to fund it. And if you're having a challenge, some people start with the B2B payment side in addition to the approval portion of it as well.
Awesome, great, thank you. It looks like we have time for maybe one more question. So let's pick this one. This is probably more for Suds. What ERP accounting programs does the Determine solution integrate with, and what are we talking about in terms of implementation times?
We have probably integrated with every ERP and every ERP version out there. As you all know, if somebody has SAP, doesn't mean they're on the same version and the kind of implementation somebody might have. So we have probably integrated with every version out there. That is not a typical limiting factor at all. So I think most AP vendors would have seen it. The typical implementation cycle, it depends again on the requirements around the customer. We have seen as small as 2 months to 6 months or plus, right? So what we typically see is about 4 months from start to finish, just given the speed at which customers can get all the different stakeholders together, drive towards making decisions. The implementing of the software itself is a very small part of this, and then testing on the customer side and feeling comfortable before rolling out those changes. So the range is probably 2 to 6. What we typically see is 3 to 4 months, just based on customers' ability to engage and move on things.
Wonderful.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say wonderful, and thank you to both of you, Bob and Suds, for joining us and speaking today. Also wanted to thank all of the attendees for joining us and submitting your questions. If you have any additional questions, please submit them to the email on the screen, and they will be answered individually. We will forward everyone a recording of today's webinar as well as soon as it is available. Again, thanks again, everyone, and if Bob or Suds has anything to leave you with, I will let them go ahead and speak now.
Thank you, everybody, for your time today. If you're interested in a copy of the ePayables Technology Advisor, please reach out to Suds or Ashley. They have a copy of it, and I'd be more than happy to share that with you. And as Ashley said, if you have any questions about Ardent or the Technology Advisor, please reach out to myself. And if you have any questions or additional information on Corcentric or Determine, definitely reach out to Ashley or Suds. But thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.